Welcome to our morning show today from WRCO, Community Conversation. Joining us in studio is Mike Breininger, well known here in the area. And on the line will be Tom Mosgaller as well. We'll introduce you to him in just a little bit and his connection to what is going on here. Mike, boy, you're adding this to your many things, your resume here. You're now an author. How about that?
Seems like it. I never seem to have enough things to do. So if I get 1 second of free time, I have to fill it with 10 seconds worth of things to do. So there's no end on the treadmill here. But this was something that I've been thinking about for a long time, actually, is writing books. And so I've done this one and working on a couple more. And so I'm going to just keep down that path for a little while.
That's interesting. You know, I saw you at the Making a Difference Awards, and you were telling me this too. And my thought was, when does the guy find the time? Is it late night or when is it?
Fortunately, I don't sleep very much. It's actually true. My sister tells me I have this 5-hour sleep gene. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Sure.
But people that only need 5 hours of sleep per night instead of 8, and I fall into that category, so I don't sleep very much. But I just try and pack as much as I can into the time I have.
Well, so it's called Pulling Together, and kind of tell us a little bit of the premise for the book.
So Pulling Together, a handbook for community change. What it is a book that gives a practical way for people to take good ideas and bring them to reality. Lots of times people want to make positive changes in their community, their church, their organization, whatever it is. And their good idea, they are all charged up about it and they talk about it for a while, but they don't really have a path to make things happen. How do I make this a reality? So it falls along the wayside. They forget about it. They think, well, nobody paid attention to me. That good idea never came about. And so unfortunately, it doesn't change the community in a positive way. This book is a practical book about how to make community change happen, filled with real stories of things that have happened in the community change framework that we have. And one of the stories in the book is the Aquatic Center in Richland Center and how that came about, which some people may know that story and some might not. But and of course, everybody has a different view on this story. But there are lots of stories from different places, some of them national stories, some of them more local, but how, real good ideas became reality.
I think sometimes maybe we feel a little helpless about, and especially if you're listening to the national news or state news or whatever. I think that's kind of what you're focusing on is start right here, start local, right?
Exactly. We oftentimes think, well, what can the government do for me? They've got all the money or the power. Or what can the business community do for me? They'll give me enough money so that I can make things happen. And sometimes those are true. You use, for a helping hand, you use the government or you use the business community, but oftentimes it's what people can do themselves in a community. And when they learn how to work together to make things happen, it's amazing what can take place on a local level. And local could be a smaller community like Richland Center, but one of our stories is from Madison, a big effort that took place there. Another one is on a national level. So when a community of people work together, whether it's a community that live near each other or a community that has similar ideas, when they work together, it's amazing what can be accomplished without the traditional forces or models that are needed, like the money assistance, government assistance, those kinds of things.
My next question is, how did you and Tom Mosgaller hook up?
So I've been involved in, just trying to bring positive community efforts and change in Richland Center and other places. I work on a state level for this also for decades now, and it's expressed itself in different ways. While we had the Richland Economic Development Board, I was the president of that board. We've got Southwest Partners, which is an economic development entity here in Richland County. Tom has been working across the state in similar type work, community development, community building, and we crossed paths about 15, 20 years ago and just kind of continued to see each other here and there and collaborate now and then. And once in a while, I would call Tom up and say, Tom, I got this issue. How would you go about working through this. And as time went on, we went kayaking together and, just built a relationship. And then Tom called me 3 years ago now and said, I think we ought to write this book. I'm like, oh my goodness, Tom, where am I going to, I didn't say this all to him, but where am I going to find time to write this book? He says, I really think it can help people and we should do it together. And of course, we ended up with more than just the two of us. We're the two primary authors, but we had a whole team that worked together on this. So we decided to collaborate together after we had built some relationship working on projects and then just kind of a personal friendship relationship. And that's how we got together on this. I'm not nearly as well known as Tom is. He's known all over the place by, in Wisconsin and other places, but it has really been a great experience working together on producing this book.
Tom is on the line with us. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Phil.
Great to have you along. So you heard Mike kind of describe it. Your side of the story, is that kind of how you saw it and how you got together for the book?
Yeah, I think Mike articulated that well. I think one thing as I listen to the two of you that the forward of the book speaks to is what can you do yourself right where you are? What can you do with a little help? And what do you need others to do that you can't do alone? I usually use the difference between a snow shovel, a snow blower, and a city plow. So, it's the way in which we are trying to think bottom up from the inside out of local communities being a force to make a difference. And I'm a two-trick pony. Spent about half of my life working inside of relatively large institutions, trying to change them from the inside, and wrote a book a few years back called Bending Granite about institutional change. And then the other half of my life, I've been a community builder working in communities everywhere from Chicago to Philadelphia to back home to my rural roots to help communities in Wisconsin improve the quality of life for people.
Your story is quite unique here, how you guys got together. And, is Richland Center kind of a unique community as you see it?
I think Richland Center is unique in the sense that you've got some extraordinary leadership there in that community that make up Southwest Partners and beyond that. That when something comes up that people want to do something about, they do it. They just roll up their sleeves and figure out a way to get it done. And that's not unique to you, but I think you have a special gift in Richland Center of having that kind of resilience over the last 10, 15 years that we're trying to spread both across the state and across the country, because we feel that what's going on nationally, if you get sucked into that vortex of national noise, it can debilitate you rather than starting from the bottom and knowing what you can do locally to make a difference.
I'm curious how you two wrote this book, and Mike, maybe you can chime in as well, but did you write it virtually or were you face-to-face? How did it go, Mike?
We had Zoom meetings every 2 weeks where we talked about who's writing what part. We reviewed that. We had our team that works with us review that. So I took charge of some of the chapters. Tom took charge of some of the chapters. So the framework, we call it, that's part of the book that kind of gives people a pathway to make things work in their ideas. It's community change equals desire times vision times power, which is relationships plus action is greater than resistance. So I took the desire and vision chapters and wrote them. Tom took the power, which is relationship and action chapters, and wrote those. And once we wrote them, then we brought it to the rest of the group and tore it apart and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it until we were satisfied with it. So it's been 3 years now of meeting about every 2 weeks on Zoom and drilling down what we think is good, what we think needs to be changed, tearing it apart and putting it back together until we finally. It was about a year ago that I thought, wow, we're at the finish line here. We're crossing the finish line. which of course took about another year before we actually crossed the finish line. So the book was officially released on January 20th, but it was 3 years of hard work before that, meeting every 2 weeks.
And you have it in hand now, so it's kind of, that's the finish line then, right?
That's right. That is the finish line.
Can you talk a little bit about, Tom, maybe you can chime in about the community change framework and what that actually is.
Yeah, so, in everything a person writes, you got chapters, and we were trying to create a skeleton upon which we could hang what we've learned, Mike and I and the others. And so we came up with this framework, which we think are the essential things that anybody who wants to take on a dream in their community, that they want to make something happen, or a discontent they want to address. And so this framework is basically an outline upon which each chapter in the book and the stories and lessons are about one of these elements of the framework. Do people have the desire? The first thing you got to do, if you got something you want to do, it may be just you or a small handful. Is there enough will to actually take something on? And you've got to assess that. And then you got to create a vision. What would we like to see if we actually leaned in and made a difference around this particular issue that we care about, whether it's cleaning up the Pine River, right, or building the swimming pool, or whatever it is. And then that time, that desire and vision times your own ability to act on it, which means your power, your ability to make the changes you seek. And from a bottom-up perspective, there's two things that result in having power. And that is your depth of relationships in your community, how strong are the networks of people who can act on it, and then the willingness to actually do something, come out of the upper room and go out there and make the change. And those have to be greater than the resistance you're going to face. And in my 50 years of doing change work, I think sometimes we tend to be a little innocent about the fact that we think that we got the greatest thing in the world, whatever it is we're trying to do, but there will be resistance. And so you can anticipate that rather than being surprised by it. So that's the framework upon which the stories and the lessons in the book are built, Phil.
Mike, you talked about the Richland Center story in the book, the Aquatic Center, and can you give us maybe a little bit of a background on that and how that came together?
Sure. So some people know the Aquatic Center story very well, others not so well. The Aquatic Center was needed because the old swimming pool in Richland Center was dilapidated, losing water. It really was not functional. It was actually dangerous. And so there was and people were going to other communities to take their children swimming during the summer. And so there was a need to do something about it. And the question was, do we fill in the hole and just rely upon the Simon Center, the indoor pool, or do we have this outdoor facility available for people? There was some discussion about that, and there, of course, was some polarization. Now, before I tell the rest of this, everybody has their own view of how this aquatic center came about. I'm going to tell you the view that I have, and what's written in the book actually highlights Liz Perkins, who's now principal at the high school, and what her role is when she came into Southwest Partners and helped develop the aquatic center. So what happened was that a group of people got together. It included Southwest Partners, included the Park and Rec Department and other interested people. And they decided we wanted to go for creating a new pool. It started out just a new swimming pool. And as it developed, they made it an aquatic center instead of a pool. So there's slides and there's, water events and so forth, the lazy river. But when it all came to the city council who had to make the decision, it was over $5 million. And the council said, we can't afford $5 million. We'll bond for some of it. We'll try and make this happen, but we can't do $5 million. And I graphically remember sitting in the meeting. Several of the Southwest Partners were sitting in a row, and Mick Cosgrove stood up. He didn't talk to us ahead of time, by the way. He stood up and said, we will raise $2 million if the city will put in the other $3 million. And I think I might have had a heart attack right at that moment. I'm thinking, Mick, what are you talking about? So and the city said, wow, that sounds pretty good. So we went about the raising of $2 million. We ended up over $2 million that we raised from mostly local community individuals and businesses. It only took us about 6 months to get there because the will was in the community to make it happen. And so that aquatic center came together because of a partnership in the community and with the city to work together to cause it to be a reality. And there were a lot of people involved in that, a lot of meetings with people, relational meetings being established, business contacts, all of those kinds of things that made that happen. And so the story of how it happened really highlights the framework that we've got in this book. It started out with desire. We created a vision, it was all plotted out, this aquatic center. And then we went into the process of building relationships and the people that we needed to be involved, the money that needed to be there, and it became a reality. It's a great success story. Of course, that aquatic center won a state award for the best small aquatic center in the state of Wisconsin. It's had amazing draw from people throughout the region. So it's one of those big success stories of Richland Center. And I'm not sure if people realize that didn't just happen. It wasn't just a vote at the city council that made it happen. It was dozens, maybe 50 or 100 people that got involved in a deep way and hundreds of others in a little bit lesser way that caused that to come about in the community. And it's changed the community. I know the hospital CEO tells me that every time he has a candidate for a new doctor coming in, that one of the things that he always does is take them down to the aquatic center and say, look what we have. And they're always impressed. They're like, whoa, this is really great. We have children. This is exactly what we want. So they feel like the community is a moving ahead, visionary community by seeing something like that.
Absolutely. And as you tell that story, too, it just, you didn't snap your fingers. There were some naysayers, obviously, and you proved a lot of people wrong that you could raise that much money, didn't you?
Well, the last part of the framework is greater than the resistance. We had quite a bit of resistance. It came to the city council, people talking and, speaking, this is foolish, we shouldn't be doing this. There were people in the community that actually started a anti-aquatic center group. I'm not into trying to make an issue that we fight over, but anytime you're going to do something, someone's going to resist it. And we have to figure out, do we have a greater momentum to make it happen than the resistance? Fortunately, over time, the resistance was overcome. A majority of the city council was on board and voted for it. And once the decision was made, it got easier. The resistance kind of was, well, maybe we'll just let it go. Or some actually joined us and were participating in making it a reality, which also happens and is exciting to have happen at times.
And it's busy every day in the summer.
Oh, my goodness, it's packed all the time.
Brings in a lot of people to the community, it does. As far as stories that you'd like to share, and Mike had mentioned, even in the Madison community you came together. Would you like to share anything there or anything that stands out in the book?
Well, I think one of the stories is around the theme of action, and that is the Own It story in the book. And that is a realty company here in Madison, Alvarado Real Estate. So Sarah Alvarado writes the story and actually lived the story of learning more and more about minority people, Black and Hispanics, having difficulty competing in the housing market in the greater Madison area because of escalating prices. And so they began an effort to make available, to raise the money, to make available small grants to homeowners that met certain criteria so that they could actually compete. So the Own It process raised $500,000 over a couple of years that is available to help minority homeowners get access to a very competitive market by providing them that extra little nudge of $15,000 that can put them into a competitive framework. They also have to go through a course on learning about what they call financial literacy, so that they become very competent as homeowners and as financial stewards of their money. So I think they've helped about 15 families now so far, and more real estate companies have joined them. Plus, a lot of the faith-based community has put in donations to raise that money to help support the access. And Jody Pope is one of the recipients, and so Sarah and Jody Pope are the two people who write that story. One as the initiator of that effort, and the other as a recipient for her family. And it's a very powerful story.
So many of the stories are just inspiring, whether you know the people, the community, or not, Tom.
Yes, that is absolutely right. I mean, one of the stories is by Jeff Yost out of Nebraska, and he is telling about his hometown of Red Cloud, way out in the middle of nowhere, that was going to build a grain elevator. A large ethanol plant was going to be built there, and he thought that in the long run was not going to be sustainable, 60 miles from any of the major highways. But they did have an asset that they were not using, which was Willa Cather's home base for many years. And there were 22 different locations in that community of Red Cloud that had her fingerprint on it. And so they turned it into a tourist destination. And to make a long story short, as a result of that effort, Red Cloud now is getting 8,000 to 10,000 people coming there annually to the Willa Cather experience, including a large annual gathering. But it's resulted in a new daycare facility, a new hotel, a grocery store, and the list goes on, Phil. So it's a good story about how a community can, if they have the imagination and the will, they can create a shared vision powerful enough to really turn that into something that can turn a community around.
Mike and I are fortunate to live here, and we know a lot of people, know what channels, who to go talk to. But like when you live in a bigger community, how do you know who to go to, and where to turn if you've got an idea like that?
Well, that's a really good question. And one of the tools we put in the book, and then in the workbook that we have as a complement to this, is what we call a relational mapping tool. And it's, embarrassingly simple. It's like a bullseye diagram in which we describe different rings of relationships you need to think about if you're going to take on a particular thing in your community. So, for example, for me, I also farm on the side. I have a grass-fed beef cattle, and I'm working in my watershed area down in Greene County to try and bring farmers and others together to work on improving the quality of water and soil in that area. And so I did a bullseye diagram, a relational map of who are the absolutely critical farmers we would want to have in that center ring who would start this effort. And on March 25th, we'll be bringing together 12 key farmers that'll start this, and then they'll start talking about who else should we invite. And over time, that will hopefully build out into a real network of farmer-led learning opportunities in our watershed. It's intentional in the way in which we go about the relational work. And if it's in a place like Madison, it's the same. It's a process of relationship building is at the heart of all good community building work.
You guys have been around the state, Mike, looking for info for the book and eventually to promote it too, right?
Yeah, we've been in lots of places. We've got stories from different areas, Madison, of course, and there's one from Viroqua about the shared child care network that they developed. We've also, there's the Disabilities Act that a lady who used to live in Wisconsin now lives in New Zealand, Kristen Joyner. She wrote about that, and that's in the book. So, yes, we've gone around the state. And in this work, it's probably not well known, but in this work, I've spent a lot of time with people that are state players, you might call them. There's a group in Wisconsin called Wisconsin Partners, which is a group of association leaders in the state of Wisconsin. And I meet with them regularly, and we talk about the affairs of the state and what we'd like to see happen. But I do want to tell you, it's much more difficult to make something happen on a state level than it is on a community or local level. So I spend most of my time working on local level. Now, Tom and I actually have collaborated, and we've done some things in Viroqua, Westby, Madison, and lots of other places that we've gone and kind of worked with people that we had connections with. And going back to your question to Tom, he talked about this relational mapping, but oftentimes we know somebody that has something to do with an area of interest. And then we go and talk to them and say, well, are there other people we should know or should go and talk to and meet and have a relationship with so that we can see things move ahead? And what that does is it kind of builds out into relational connections in many places, not just a local community. Although I still say most of what happens is going to take place locally. There are times when we say, oh, well, there's an expert in Milwaukee or Madison or Green Bay. Why don't we get a hold of them and let them come and give us some advice in this? So this relational network builds outward to help what's going on in whatever the effort is that we've got going in a more local level.
The other thing that strikes me too, Mike, is that you pulled together the aquatic center thing and all that. Nobody worried about, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Catholic? Are you a Protestant? That's a key thing, especially in these local communities, that we just have one goal in mind, right?
Well, we know that right now there's families that are divided and friends that are divided. Social media is ablaze with ideological and political statements that tend to divide people. They're usually hurtful, and you got family members that won't talk to each other. They won't go to Christmas celebrations together. This process, the book itself, but the process we go through is a little bit of an antidote to that, because we tend to, for example, I'm going to use Southwest Partners because that's local here in Richland Center. We tend not to think about the differences we have in our political or ideological views. It's more like, this is what we focus on. What do we want to see in our community that's a positive thing? Can we agree on that? And it turns out there's an amazing amount of agreement when we start talking about what's good for us, for our families, for our community. What do we think will benefit a lot of people? And suddenly those, if you leave them to the side, those political, ideological differences will kind of move away from the center of what you're talking about, and you'll find yourself working with people that are just people from your community that have similar interests and desires in life, and we're no longer in that, that swirl of we have to agree on everything or we're going to be enemies. So we make friends instead of enemies, if you will.
Tom, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think, just being real candid with you, Mike and I have probably a little different political views, right, on the world. But that's never been the issue. When we sit down to work on something, it's trying to find the common ground and not what polarizes. And so, over years, Mike and I have worked on a lot of stuff, and I think we've always found where the common ground is to be able to act on that. And I think right now there's just an accent on polarization as opposed to common ground. And I'd like to think that what we've written and the way in which we've written it is an antidote to that. It's the fact that don't let that stuff keep you polarized when you got things that you care about deeply. I was at a meeting last night on mental health issues. Well, Republicans have kids with mental health issues, and so do Democrats. And we just never talk about that. We just say, tell me your story. What's important to you? And you find common ground to work on it. The other thing I just share is that it's not that Mike and I are riding in on a white horse, like the Lone Ranger, and we we solve things. It's not what we're about. What we are about is helping people learn what they can do themselves. And that is a real emphasis in this book is what can you do yourself? And how can we help you do it, learn to do it? But the iron rule of good community building is don't do things for people they can learn to do for themselves. And we try and practice that more as teachers than as the ones who come in and do it for you.
The book is called Pulling Together. We're going to be back in right after these words, but some good conversation continues in a moment. Tom Mosgaller by phone and Mike Breininger in the studio with us today on The Morning Show. The book is called Pulling Together, a handbook for community change, and its authors are with us here today on The Morning Show, Tom Mosgaller and Mike Breininger as well. Mike, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about the origin of the story and how you and Tom got together originally.
So I kind of went over our meeting, which was, 10, 15 years ago, but as we got together and started working on things, we actually discovered some interesting intersections in our origin. So let me just tell you mine first, and then I'll give it to Tom. But so my parents actually moved here to Richland County from Long Island, New York in 1950. So my father had known nothing but the city, and he came out and wanted to be a farmer in Richland County, Wisconsin. So I grew up on a dairy farm, and those were struggling days, the 50s and 60s for dairy farmers. You could barely get enough money for the milk to keep on going. In the late 1960s, there were milk strikes going on. There was the National Farmers Organization, NFO, that organized most of these strikes, just trying to get a living out of being a dairy farmer. And I remember graphically, I maybe was 11, 12 years old, and my father said, I want you to come into the milk house with me. We had a bulk tank full of milk. And he said, I'm going to open this valve on the bulk tank, and I'm going to let the milk run down the drain because we are trying to make a better future for you. And it was the kind of a galvanizing moment that I still remember, that sometimes sacrifice needs to be made in order to make things better. Now, the end of the story wasn't all that happy. The farmers still didn't get very much for their milk, but there were a number of farmers that sacrificed tremendously to try and get a fair price for their milk. My dad wanting to be involved in that and making things better for in this case, the dairy community, has been somewhat of a motivating factor for the rest of my life here. So, small dairy farm growing up in Richland County, Wisconsin, and I still graphically remember those days, and that still motivates me. Not entire motivation, but that's a lot of the motivation that I started with.
What about Tom, your origin?
Yeah, so the genesis story for me, I grew up in Door County on a small dairy farm. I think we had 14 cows. And one Saturday morning, my dad says, you want to go with Reuben, our neighbor, and we're going to go to a rally in which we're going to try and improve the pricing of milk. And, it was better than mucking out the cattle barn, which is what Saturday mornings were for. And I got all excited, got in the truck, didn't know what the heck we were going to. We went out to Brussels, Wisconsin, on the southern end of Door County, and there's about 60 farmers standing out in the field in a kind of a March day like today, and in a little snow and dirt, and they were all dumping their cans of milk into the field. And as a kid, I watched that milk running down those dirty furrows in those fields, and I had big eyes. I didn't know what the heck was going on, and there was leaders rallying people and say, if you can hold out a couple more weeks, I think we can get them to have a conversation with us. And everybody rallied, and Dad and I and Reuben went back to the truck, and somebody drove by on the main road and opened their window and threw a newspaper out in the snow. And he said, read this, you farmers. And I won't use the expletive in there. And so I picked up that newspaper, opened it up, and looked at the headline, and it read something like, Wisconsin farmers starve Chicago children. And I turned to Dad and Reuben and went back to the truck and I said, Dad, are we starving Chicago children? And that was a genesis event for me because my dad looked at Reuben and tried and deflected by saying, Reuben, maybe you can explain this to Tom on the way home in the truck. I remember Reuben putting his arm around me and saying, Tom, these things are very complicated. And that was a genesis story for me for wanting to learn about the things they don't teach you in school about power and change. And that's how I got into this. And Mike and I never knew those stories were genesis stories for both of us, but they fundamentally shape the root of who we are.
Absolutely. And we all three have that in common, that farm background. You learn a little bit about sacrifice and hard work, don't you, Mike?
No, but it's a great learning environment on the farm. In fact, that's the one thing that's sad for me is that we don't have many farm kids anymore. The farms are big. They've got hired hands. I remember going to UW-Madison when I was wrestling for UW, and there was a guy who wanted to hire me for a job, and he said, now, tell me about your background. I said, well, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm. He said, well, you're hired. I said, well, don't you want to hear the rest? I'm a wrestler, too. He said, oh, you're a wrestler? He said, well, you're double hired. He said, those are the two kinds of people that I hire, wrestlers and farm kids. So that whole work ethic and that understanding of how we interact with soil and nature and life is really powerful on the farm.
One of the big goals, Tom, is to kind of infuse hope into communities, isn't it?
I think that's well stated, Phil. That's exactly what we're trying to do during these times when a lot of people are hunkering down and cinching up their chin straps. We're saying now is a perfect time to get out there and take on some things. Use that energy that you have about any discontent or a dream you want to make something happen. Now is a good time to use that energy in a constructive way, and we think that the book and the content of the book can really help you have a framework for doing that. It's malleable, and I think it'll help anyone who wants to make what I would call change that is an improvement, because not all change is improvement. We'd like to think that the changes we share in the book and we try and generate are actual improvements in people's communities.
You're going to be having some workshops, Mike?
Well, okay, so we've actually got 3 different activities going on related to the book. One is just strictly book launches, where we kind of talk about the book, we give a framework, we do a little reading, we sign, we sell the books. Okay, we've already done one in Madison, and we've done a few online. The second is we'll speaking engagements, where we'll come and speak to groups and talk to them about how this works, this framework, this process of bringing ideas to reality. And the third is the workshops, where we actually train people how to do this. It's kind of hands-on. We give them scenarios they have to work through, and they learn how to use these elements of the framework to make a real change in their own community. So we're involved in all 3 of those things and have scheduled some of the events for those 3 things.
Really around the state, right?
Right. So we'll be in Green Bay on March 27th, and Green Bay, Appleton area again on April 3rd and 4th. Verona, which is a suburb of Madison, on April 10th. Viroqua is April 26th. I did schedule in Richland Center. We've got on June 9th, which is the opening of the Aquatic Center. We're going to do a launch event over at the Community Center, Aquatic Center on June 9th. Probably we'll be doing something at Oak Couch Books and Libations in Richland Center, just a signing event or something like that, and the Richland Center Library. So we're actively involved in scheduling these events as speaking engagements, trainings, workshops, and so forth. Now, I know we've got more than this scheduled. I just didn't get a chance to get them all down, but it actually can become overwhelming because the demand is increasing for this to happen. Like UW Extension has contacted us and said, we'd like you to do some trainings, and Southwest Regional Planning Commission. So we've got to it's taking off, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yes, we do schedule these things. If anybody's interested in having us do a presentation on one of those 3 levels, we're available for that.
So you've had one under your belt, at least looking ahead to the future. Was there a common thing from the book launch, Tom, that maybe a question that came up or somebody asked you a question?
You know, the amazing thing, from my observation, Phil, the first book launch a week or so ago, you know, there was about 50 people there, so the room was packed, and the diversity of people in the room was really amazing, and the energy in the room was really amazing. It's just clear, and I told Mike afterwards, I think we didn't have to do anything. If we were to just put people in a room right now and said, you know, what's a dream or discontent you want to do something about, they would have spent the hour and a half talking with each other, because they just wanted to improve their community, and we gave them a reason to do that. And I think that's true. We've got, like Mike said, we have about 12, 15 events coming up, ranging from podcasts to workshops, and that'll only increase. And that just gives me great hope, because we didn't write the book to write the book. It's to actually get things happening in community and make the action happen.
So the next question, Mike, is what's next? Do you have a vision for Richland Center?
Oh, well, our Southwest Partners Group and others that we work with certainly have lots of vision for Richland Center. One of the things we've been working on is a skate park over at Crosscut Park. The UW Richland campus, which is kind of sitting there all by itself and lonely right now, and we're hopeful that something big will happen there, something good that will benefit the community. I know there's already been some activity with the gym and the tennis courts, but there's several other buildings, 6 more buildings sitting there, and so we hope to be partners with the county and making that to be redemptive, just a jewel for the county and the city instead of buildings that are deteriorating. So that's on the agenda. And there's always new ideas. Folks are always having great ideas about how do we make the community a better place. And so we're working on those things as they come up.
I'm sure people come up to you in person as well and say, hey, what can we do about this, or can you help us?
I get calls. I get people coming up to me personally. Would you do this? And usually I'll say, well, maybe we'd help you, or if there's a way that you could come and present this to our group, we might consider taking that on. There's more to do than we have people to do it, but we try and make the efforts that will benefit the most people possible. And so that's the efforts in the local community, as well as when we reach out beyond Richland County.
Tom, you talked about a watershed effort in your area, but do you have any goals or things that you'd like to see in your community coming up that you're going to work towards?
Well, right now I've got like 4 things that I'm working on. I'm a veteran, so I'm working on with a group called Farmers and Veterans, and we're looking at how do we help more veterans get the opportunity to actually transition into farming as a life's work. So that's important to me, and I'm using all the things that I know about organizing to help make that happen. I'm working with St. Vincent de Paul on helping the number of cars going through the food pantry to pick up food has doubled in the last 6 months or so. And so we're looking at ways in which we can expand the food supply and helping people access the food they need. So there's an array of things. And in the process of doing all of those, I'm teaching people how to do this. It's not like I'm leading it. I'm always saying, so what are you going to do? How can I help you? It's not that I'm taking point on this, and I prefer the role of being a teacher, given I've been doing this stuff for a long time. So it's a good time for people who want to be citizens and work together in association.
How can people buy the book, Mike?
So the book is available out there on all the platforms. So if you think about Amazon, the biggest bookseller in the country, the book is listed on Amazon. You can get it there. Pulling Together, a handbook for community change. Okuch Books and Libations locally here is carrying the book. So if people want to go to downtown Richland Center, they can buy the book there. Our publisher is Acta Press, ACTA, Acta Press. They can get it there. Or we have a website for the book, and they can buy the book on the website also, which the website is pulling-together.com. Pulling-together.com. Now, it's also available on other platforms, Apple. I'm sorry, I don't even know all these platforms. But the electronic platforms, bookstores are hit and miss, the books that they carry. So if a book starts to become popular, they're more likely to carry it. I was very appreciative Daniel Miller is, having it in the local bookstore here, and we're trying to get it in some other local bookstores. A lot of people buy books, though, through the Amazon type platforms. It's not on audiobook right now, but we're coming down the home stretch and having it available on audiobook. So that will be available on the various platforms on audiobook also in the near future.
They're going to record it then?
We are going to record it, although there's new developments in audiobooks. So they now you can clone your voice. So this is crazy, but you can talk into a microphone for a period of time, and then they got your voice down, and then they use kind of an AI to use your own voice and read the whole book without having to sit there and read the book and make the mistakes and fix the mistakes. There's also a version that is entirely AI. And AI, which is artificial intelligence. AI, you might think, well, that's mechanical and but it doesn't. It sounds perfectly natural. And because we've got these storyteller contributors, we can change the voices so it sounds like the actual voices of the people who contributed. It's amazing.
That is amazing. Except it won't get Tom Mosgaller's last name right. Is that right, Tom?
That's right. I am without AI, cannot find me.
You guys have another book in you somewhere down? It's probably too premature to ask that question, but can you see yourselves getting together on another book?
Very possibly. I do want to say we call this a handbook. So it's kind of a read through with some exercises at the end. But there's also a companion workbook that goes with this that we've already created, and that is available on our website. It's not on the Amazon type platforms. But that's very much a helpful companion to get people to be able to work through step-by-step process. They can almost teach themselves how to do this after they read the book, get the handbook, and it's a nominal price. It's a printing fee price on it. So that's available too. We'll see whether we go down. I've got lots of other books in me. We'll see whether Tom and I continue to collaborate on this.
Tom, it's been a pleasure to meet you over the phone. Anything else you'd like to add today?
No, I just thank you, Phil, for the great station you guys got. I knew Ron Fruit and getting to know you, and you guys got a high-quality radio station there. Thanks for being there. You're a real asset.
Thank you very
that
much.
Area of the world.
Yeah, appreciate you saying that.
And I agree with that. WRCO is a magnificent asset to Richland Center, Richland County area.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you guys again today, and also to hear about this story. It's very inspiring. So we hope it inspired maybe some listeners today, too.
I hope so, yeah.
Work together for community change. It's called Pulling Together, the book. And joining us today, Tom Mosgaller and Mike Breininger on The Morning Show.